The cold white lights hummed above, casting a pale glow over the long, narrow room. Every wall was smooth metal, polished and sterile. The air felt heavy, filled with the faint smell of chemicals and the quiet hiss of life support machines. Lyra lay on the bed at the far end. Her thin frame was covered with a light silver blanket. Her skin, once bright blue, had faded to a dull gray. Her breathing was slow and weak, almost invisible. Her large eyes stared at the ceiling. But they were not empty. They were filled with quiet acceptance. She knew her time was almost over. Outside her glass-walled chamber, two alien doctors stood, their faces unreadable. They spoke in low voices. Their hands moved across, glowing panels as they reviewed her life signs. A third figure entered, a nurse with soft footsteps. She carried a small tablet. Her eyes avoided Lyra. She whispered something to the doctors. They nodded slowly. One of them tapped a button, and the word euthanasia glowed red across the screen. It was decided. The treatment had failed. The disease had eaten away at her organs, and no cure existed. In this star system, tomorrow, she would be gone. Lyra heard everything. The glass walls were thin enough for sound to travel. She did not cry. She had known this would happen for months. What she did not expect was the sudden sound of the side door sliding open. A tall figure stepped in, wearing a white coat with a small Earth emblem on the sleeve. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp but kind. He was human. Humans were rare in this part of space, and even rarer inside an alien medical facility. The doctors gave him a cold look, but the nurse spoke quickly, telling them he was a specialist, brought in for final comfort care. They allowed him to approach. He walked slowly to her bed. His boots made soft echoes on the metal floor. When he reached her side, he smiled faintly. Not forced, but real. "Hello," he said, in a calm voice. "I'm Daniel." Lyra's lips curved into the smallest smile. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're human." Daniel nodded. "Yes, I am." He replied gently. "I came to see if there's anything you need before you rest." Her eyes studied him for a moment. It was strange. His presence felt warm in this cold place. "There is something," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "It's my last wish." Daniel leaned closer, so he could hear her better. "Tell me," he said softly. Lyra's gaze didn't move from his. "I want to try the human reproduction method." The words hung in the air. Daniel froze, thinking he had misheard. "What?" he asked, his voice low. Her fingers twitched slightly under the blanket. "Your way of creating life," she said. "Not the machines, not the cold laboratories we use here." She paused for breath. "I read about it. I saw how it involves warmth, closeness, feeling. I want to experience that before I die." Daniel's breath caught in his chest. He looked at the glass wall where the doctors stood. Still watching but unable to hear their conversation, he looked back at her, searching for any sign that she was joking, but her expression was serious, almost desperate. "You understand what you're asking?" He whispered. "Yes," she said. "I know it's forbidden, I know it's dangerous. But it's the only thing I've never had, and soon I will have nothing." Daniel sat in silence. His training told him to refuse, his career, his freedom. Even his life could be destroyed if he said yes. But the way she looked at him made it impossible to give a quick answer. Her eyes were filled with something he rarely saw in this galaxy. Hope. The machines beeped slowly beside her, counting down her final hours. Daniel felt his throat tighten. The nurse at the door gave him a small, almost invisible nod, as if telling him she would not interfere. "I can't promise anything," Daniel finally said, his voice quiet, "but I will stay with you until the end." Lyra closed her eyes. For a moment, letting the relief wash over her, she didn't need a promise yet. She only needed the chance. Somewhere outside, the announcement bell rang, signaling the end of visiting hours. The doctors expected him to leave, but Daniel didn't move. He pulled a chair closer and sat beside her bed. His hand rested on the edge of the blanket, not touching her yet. Just close enough for her to feel his presence. For the first time in days, Lyra felt warmth in the cold chamber, and Daniel, though unsure of what he would do next, knew that this moment had already changed both of them. Daniel sat in the chair long after the doctors had left the observation window. The room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of the monitor beside Lyra's bed. She kept her eyes on him, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice soft like the sound of air escaping. "A cracked seal. I told you I'd stay," he replied. His tone was calm. But his mind was far from it. The request she had made hours ago still echoed in his head. It wasn't something a dying patient normally asked for. It wasn't something his training had prepared him for either. "You think I'm strange," she said suddenly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I can see it in your eyes." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No." "I think you're brave," he said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "But what you're asking? It's dangerous. Not just for you, but for me, too." "I know," she breathed. "They would punish you, maybe worse. But I don't have much time, Daniel, my people. They've taken everything human away from life. We are born in metal chambers raised by machines. And when we die, it's in rooms like this. Cold, clean, and empty." Her words cut deep. Daniel had seen many alien cultures, some colder than others, but there was something about the emptiness in her tone that made his chest tighten. "I don't want to die never knowing what it means to feel close to someone," she continued. "I read human stories. They talk about warmth, touch, love, even pain. I want to feel like I lived before my last breath." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked to the glass wall. Looking out into the dim corridor beyond, a security drone floated past, its red light scanning the room for movement. He stepped back into the shadows. The nurse had been right. If anyone found out why he was still here, he'd be arrested before he could even explain. When he turned back, Lyra was watching him with those same unblinking eyes. "You don't have to do it for me," she said quietly. "You could just leave. Pretend you never met me. It would be easier, but I'd remember." He replied, his voice was firm, "And I'd hate myself for walking away." She closed her eyes, breathing slowly. Then "Don't walk away." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, almost alive. Daniel could hear her breathing, the faint hum of the machines and the distant thrum of the station's engines. Every second felt longer than the last. He stepped closer to her bed. His hand rested on the blanket again, but this time he didn't pull away. Her skin was cool through the thin fabric. Her eyes opened again, locking onto his. "You've got 3 days," he said finally. "I don't know what's possible, but I'll make sure you don't spend them alone." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded. The relief in her expression said more than anything she could have voiced. The door hissed open suddenly, and Daniel's heart jumped. A shadow moved in the doorway. The nurse, her eyes flicked to Lyra, then to Daniel. "You need to leave now," she whispered urgently. "The shift change is coming, and new guards won't look the other way." Daniel glanced at Lyra. She gave him a faint smile. "Come back tomorrow," she said softly. "Promise me." "I promise," he replied without hesitation as he stepped into the corridor. The nurse pulled the door closed behind him. The metal walls of the hallway felt colder than the chamber itself. He walked quickly, keeping his head down, passing 2 alien officers who didn't spare him more than a glance. But his mind wasn't on the danger. It was on the promise he had just made. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in his small quarters aboard the station, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Lyra had said. He had seen soldiers die on battlefields, civilians in burning cities. But never had he met someone who faced death with such a strange kind of courage. Somewhere deep down, he knew her wish wasn't only about reproduction, it was about defying the cold world she had been born into, about feeling like she belonged to something alive, warm, and real. When the morning lights of the station cycle switched on, Daniel was already dressed. He walked past the med bay's entrance twice before finally going in. The nurse met him. With a nervous glance, "You're taking a big risk," she whispered. "If they catch you." "I can't protect you. I'm not asking you to," he replied. He stepped inside the cold chamber again. Lyra was awake. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, and for a moment, the sterile room didn't feel so empty. Daniel closed the door behind him. The faint click of the seal locking out the noise from the corridor. The air inside the chamber was still. Almost too still, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Lyra was sitting up slightly, supported by a thin cushion. Her hands rested on her lap, her fingers pale and fragile like glass. "You came back," she said, and her voice carried a mix of surprise and relief. "I told you I would," Daniel replied, pulling the chair closer to her. "Bed, how are you feeling today?" She let out a faint laugh, though it was barely louder than a breath. "Like someone who has 3 days left," she said. "But now?" "Those days feel different." Daniel studied her face, noticing how her eyes seemed brighter than yesterday. There was still exhaustion in her features, but also something else, a quiet determination. He didn't want to admit it out loud, but he could feel it too. A pull toward something he couldn't yet define. "I thought a lot about what you said," he began, keeping his voice low. "About your wish." Her eyes searched his face, and he hesitated, glancing toward the glass wall where the observation lights were dimmed. "And I'm trying to understand," he said. "For humans, reproduction is not just a way to create life. It's also about connection, trust, and choice. But for you, it's different. It's nothing," she said bitterly. "We're given no choice. It's assigned, calculated, done in a machine while you sleep. There is no hand to hold, no face to see, no warmth to feel. It's all empty." Daniel felt a weight in his chest. He couldn't imagine growing up in a world where something so human was turned into a cold process. "So what you want is not just the method," he said slowly. "You want the feeling that comes with it." "Yes," she whispered. "I want to feel human before I die." Even if just for one moment, the words stayed between them like a fragile thread. Daniel could feel the danger of that wish pressing in on all sides. This was not just about her. If anyone discovered he was even talking to her like this, he would be removed from the station. Or worse, they talked for hours, not about the request itself, but about life. She told him about her childhood in the nursery dome, about watching the stars through a reinforced glass ceiling, wondering what warmth felt like. She described the first time she saw a human trader on the station, and how she noticed the way he smiled at people. A real smile, not one programmed by social training. In return, Daniel told her about Earth's sunsets, about the smell of rain hitting soil, about sitting close to a fire on a winter night. Her eyes widened at each description, as if she could see it all in her mind. "You talk about these things like they're alive," she said softly. "Here, nothing feels alive." He leaned back in his chair, looking at her for a long moment. "Maybe that's why I'm still here," he said, "because you remind me that life is more than rules and orders." Her breathing slowed, her eyelids heavy, but she fought to stay awake. "Daniel, if you say yes, it has to be soon. My body won't last much longer." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of time pressing down on them. "I know," he said, "but I need to find a way that won't get you hurt." Or me. The door hissed open suddenly. and Daniel quickly stood. The nurse slipped in, her face tense. "Security is increasing their rounds," she whispered. "You're not safe here much longer. If you're going to do anything for her, you'll have to move fast." Daniel looked at Lyra, and in that instant, he understood that hesitation would only take her wish further away. She reached out weakly, her fingers brushing his hand. The touch was light, almost not there. But it carried more weight than anything he had felt in years. He didn't promise her outright, but in his mind, the decision was already forming. If this was the last thing he could give her, he would not waste the chance. Daniel couldn't shake the image of her hand touching his. It stayed with him long after he left the chamber. Even as the station's corridors swallowed him into their cold metallic walls, each step echoed like a clock ticking down her final hours. He knew that if he waited too long, there would be nothing left to save. That night, he didn't go back to his quarters. Instead, he found himself in the lower decks, a place where rules bent and shadows lived. The air there smelled of engine grease and recycled air. Small groups of workers huddled in corners, avoiding eye contact. Daniel kept his head low, searching for someone, anyone who could help him bypass the station's strict med-bay security. He found an old maintenance officer leaning against a broken console. The man was human, grizzled, with eyes that had seen too many bad deals. "You want in without logging your name?" the officer said quietly. After hearing Daniel's request, "That's not just against the rules, that's suicide. I don't have a choice," Daniel replied. His voice was steady, but carried a weight the officer didn't miss. The man studied him for a long moment, then slipped a thin access card into Daniel's hand. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered, "and you sure as hell didn't say why." By the next station cycle, Daniel was back at the med bay. The corridors were quieter than usual. The hum of the station's core, a constant presence beneath his boots. He approached the side entrance, swiped the stolen card, and heard the soft click of the lock releasing. The door slid open just enough for him to slip inside. Lyra was awake, sitting up. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You're here when you're not supposed to be," she whispered. "I couldn't wait until morning," Daniel said, pulling the chair close. "There's not much time." Her gaze softened, though her breathing was heavier than yesterday. "You risked a lot coming here," she said. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of her hair back from her face. The gesture was small, but it made her close her eyes for a moment. "Because some things are worth the risk," he said finally. A faint alarm sounded in the distance, not loud enough to mean danger, but enough to remind him they weren't alone on the station. He could feel the tension in the air, like the walls themselves were aware of what he was planning. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me," she said softly. "I wanted this to be something beautiful, not something that ends with you in chains." Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If I get caught, that's on me, not you." The nurse appeared at the door without warning, her face pale. "You have less than 2 hours before the night. Guards sweep this floor," she said quickly. "After that, there's no way in or out without getting scanned." Daniel nodded, his mind working fast. He didn't have a full plan yet, but the choice was made. He wasn't leaving her to die with her last wish unanswered. Lyra reached for his hand again, this time holding it with what little strength she had left. "Then let it be tonight," she whispered. "Before it's too late." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. The cold chamber suddenly felt warmer. Not because the temperature had changed, but because the decision had finally been made. There would be no turning back. The station's night cycle began with the dimming of the corridor lights. Turning the metal walls into long shadows, Daniel waited in a narrow storage room across from the med bay. The stolen access card in his hand, his heartbeat was steady, but heavy. Like each beat carried the weight of his decision. He timed his move with the sound of the maintenance drones passing by. Their hum masked the faint click of the medbay door as he slipped inside. The chamber was dark, except for the pale blue light from the life support monitor beside Lyra's bed. She was awake, her eyes catching the light, making them look almost like they held tiny stars. "You came," she whispered, her voice both surprised and certain at the same time. "I told you I would," Daniel replied, closing the door quietly. Behind him, he crossed the room and sat beside her. His presence seemed to change the air. Less sterile, less cold. She studied his face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. "I don't want to waste words tonight," she said. Softly, "We don't have many." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words like a blade against his chest. Outside the room, the faint sound of footsteps reminded him that every second here was borrowed. He reached out and took her hand fully this time, not through the blanket, but skin. To skin, her hand was cold but alive, her fingers curled weakly around his. And for the first time, she let herself close her eyes and breathe slowly. "This is the first time anyone has touched me like this," she said quietly. "It feels like I'm not alone." "You're not," he answered. His voice was low but steady. The moment stretched between them, fragile yet unbreakable. She leaned her head slightly toward him. "I don't want machines, Daniel. I don't want cold walls and blinking lights. I want this. I want to feel human." Daniel knew there was no more space for hesitation. The station's rules, the council's punishments, alone. The risk to his own life, all of it seemed smaller now compared to the weight of her request. He leaned closer, speaking just above a whisper. "Then tonight, it's not about the station. Not about their laws. It's just you and me." She opened her eyes, and he saw something in them he hadn't seen before. Not fear, but peace. She gave the smallest nod, and for a moment, the cold chamber seemed to vanish, replaced by the warmth of two people choosing to share something real in the middle of a world that had forgotten what real was. The hum of the life support faded in Daniel's mind as he focused only on her, the way her breathing slowed when he held her closer, the way her lips trembled when she whispered his name. It wasn't the kind of moment that could be measured by rules or by time. It was something alive, fragile, and fleeting outside. The sound of a distant alarm began to echo faintly through the hall. Daniel knew it was only a matter of minutes before the guards made their sweep. But here, in this small pocket of borrowed time, he stayed. Because leaving her side now would mean breaking the very promise that had brought him here. When she finally rested her head against him, her voice was barely there. "Thank you. You've already given me more than I thought I'd ever have." Daniel held her a little tighter, knowing that when this night ended, nothing on this station would be the same again. The station's artificial dawn crept in slowly, the pale white lights humming back to life. Daniel hadn't moved from her side. Lyra was still leaning against him, her breathing soft and uneven. The warmth between them lingered, not just in touch, but in the unspoken truth that last night had changed everything. The door hissed open without warning. The nurse stepped in, her eyes scanning the room quickly before locking on Daniel. "You have to go now," she whispered urgently. "The morning shift guards are already in the corridor." Daniel glanced down at Lyra. She was awake, her eyes tired but calm. "Is it morning already?" she asked, her voice thin but steady. "It is," he said quietly. "And I have to leave before they find me here." Her fingers tightened weakly around his hand. "I don't want you to go. I'll be back," Daniel promised, though he didn't know if that was a promise he could keep. The nurse was already checking the hallway, her voice sharp with tension. "Daniel now." He carefully eased Lyra back against her pillow. His hand lingered on hers for a heartbeat longer before he stepped away. She followed him with her eyes, until the door closed, sealing her inside the cold chamber once more. Out in the corridor, Daniel walked quickly, his expression neutral. passing 2 alien officers without drawing suspicion. His mind was racing, replaying every moment from the night before. It wasn't only her wish that haunted him now. It was the thought of her dying in that sterile room without anyone beside her. Hours later, as he sat in the quiet of his quarters, the station's intercom crackled to life. Patient Lyra of Medbay 12 is scheduled for final procedure in 24 cycles. The words were clinical, detached, but to Daniel they sounded like a death sentence ticking closer. He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. Every instinct in him screamed to act. He had given her one night, but that wasn't enough. Not when he could still see the life in her eyes by the time the next night cycle began. Daniel had already made his choice. He went to the maintenance decks again, trading one of his last personal belongings, a small metal pendant from Earth, for a medical transport clearance chip. It would give him access to the emergency exit routes from the medbay, but only once, when he slipped into the chamber. That night, Lyra was awake, waiting for him. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "I couldn't stay away." He admitted, moving closer, "But I didn't come just to see you." Her eyes searched his. "Then why?" "Because I'm not letting them take you tomorrow," he said. His voice was low, but fierce. "We're leaving this place." For a moment, she didn't speak. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching Daniel. "If they catch us, they won't," he cut in, though part of him knew it was a dangerous lie. "We have one chance, and we take it tonight." Her hand reached for his again, not weak this time, but with a spark of strength he hadn't felt before. The cold chamber seemed smaller, the walls closing in. The clock was ticking faster now, and both of them knew that the next hours would decide everything. The medbay was quieter than it had ever been. The night cycle's dim blue light stretched long shadows across the walls. Daniel stood by the door, listening for the faint hum of the security drones. When the corridor outside fell silent, he swiped the stolen clearance chip, and the lock clicked open. Lyra was already sitting up, her blanket draped around her shoulders. Her breathing was heavier than yesterday, but her eyes were alert. "Is it time?" she asked, her voice low. "It's time," Daniel replied. He moved quickly to her side, slipping his arm under her to help her stand. She was lighter than he expected, her weight fragile in his grasp. The nurse appeared in the doorway, her face tense. "You've got 10 minutes before the floor scan," she whispered. "After that, you're trapped." Daniel nodded once. He and Lyra slipped into the corridor, moving fast but silent. Every step felt like it carried the weight of every rule they were breaking. The soft echo of their footsteps mixed with the steady beat of his heart. They passed the first corner without trouble. The second turn brought them face to face with a patrolling drone. Daniel froze, pulling Lyra into a narrow service alcove. The red scanner beams swept past, missing them by inches. When the path cleared, they moved again. Lyra's grip on his arm was tight, her breath short. "Almost there," he whispered, though they both knew that almost could still be a lifetime away. They reached the emergency hatch, its metal surface cold under Daniel's hand. He pressed the chip into the panel, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dark maintenance tunnel beyond. They stepped inside. The air warmer here from the heat of the station's engines. The sound of metal groaning under the strain of the reactors filled the space. Daniel guided her through the narrow passage, each step taking them further from the cold chamber that had been her prison. Halfway through, the alarm began to wail. Sharp and urgent, unauthorized movement detected, a mechanical voice echoed. Through the tunnel, Daniel's pulse spiked, but he tightened his hold on her. "Don't stop," he urged. The tunnel opened into a small docking bay where an old medical transport waited. Its systems were in standby mode. Daniel rushed to the controls, setting them to manual override. The engines roared to life. the sound drowning out the alarms. Lyra sank into the passenger seat, her eyes wide. "Are we really leaving?" "Yes," Daniel said, gripping the controls, "and we're not coming back." The hatch sealed behind them. The transport lifted off, sliding out of the bay into the black expanse of space. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, their light reflecting in Lyra's eyes. She leaned back, her breathing shallow, but her lips curved in a faint smile. "You gave me more than I asked for," she whispered, her voice fading. "You gave me freedom." Daniel reached for her hand, holding it tightly as the transport moved farther from the station. The alarms grew distant, swallowed by the silence of space. He didn't know where they would go next, but he knew one thing: she would not face her last moments in a cold chamber. And as the stars turned above them, Daniel felt that maybe, just maybe, her last wish had been the beginning of something neither of them had expected.